Once again, good morning. Glad to see everybody all excited, okay, and singing along. What a great time we get to come together and worship. This month we are starting a new series, and this is one that I'm going to just make this confession now. I have never talked about this subject in depth on a Sunday morning, but I feel that because of some things that we see just, again, worldwide and so on, that it's an important conversation to have. Leadership. Leadership. When I throw that word out there, some of you are going to immediately tune out and say, well, I am not a leader. We'll get there. We're going to work on you, okay? Or, oh, well, what does this have to do with the Bible? Glad you asked, because there's a lot of examples of it, and we're going to take a look at a couple of them over the next couple of weeks. Now, I've called this series Across the Sideline. Next month starts something called March Madness. And living in Connecticut, I know that this is a place that appreciates college basketball. I lived in many places that are like, why would you waste your time like that? Basically what everyone in Connecticut says about me watching college football. So it's a waste of time. Why are you wasting your time with that? Well, here's the thing. March Madness is coming up, and it's always that important key moment when a player who's been on the bench decides to get up and cross the sideline to get into the game, to impact the game, to put their will into their team, to direct the fate of what happens at the end of the game if it's a win or a loss. It's an important first step over that line and into the game. And my reason for wanting to talk about leadership is because I believe there are those that are here today that have the potential to be leaders or are gifted in leadership but are not using it. And we're going to take an even broader definition of leadership in just a second. I want us to take a look at what we even think leadership is, because that's going to define this whole thing. Now, the reason I think this is important is, number one, our world is desperate for leaders right now. We're desperate for leaders. We're desperate for a good leader in some aspect, whether that would be in churches, whether that would be in our communities, whether that be something politically and so on. Again, we're not getting into the politics. I just dealt with all that. But we are looking for a leader, someone that we can look up to, someone that we can hear their opinion on things. And the reason I know people are looking for it is when you look at something such as social media and you have somebody who's very well known, you see how many followers that they have. And people are waiting for them to give their input or their opinion on the smallest things that happen in our world. And oftentimes they'll say, I agree with them, so I'm going to just go with what they say is true. We are also at a time where we don't necessarily have great examples of leadership. We don't have great, and sadly, this has even trickled into the church, where there have been very well-known pastors who have been caught. And this, sadly, it's been 20, 30 years. I remember Jim Baker. I was in high school when that happened, and the whole thing with Jim Baker, and all the money that was going on there and was being misused and all of that, it just keeps happening. We know that people need leaders. There's bad leadership all around us. And I also believe that many of us here have the opportunity to change the world, but we may just not feel like doing that. We're comfortable. And it'd be much easier for us to stay here, just take everything in, and not have to get involved. Now, if you know or you've been a part of Hope Church, you know that we have core values. And one of those core values is leadership. We believe and we want to be good at training leaders, people who are potential leaders or people that are leaders already. We want to put you into spots here, or we want to encourage you to take leadership wherever you have an opportunity. That may not be even here in Hope Church. Just because you have the gift of leadership doesn't always mean that we have a spot. And we would love to try and create one, but sometimes we have to encourage you, you know what? Awesome. Lead where you are. Lead in your job, lead in your community, lead wherever it is. We believe that every person in the church has some level of leadership. And by leadership, I want to say this. You have some level of influence or impact. Everyone in here has a level of influence and impact. That may be at your job. That may just be in your home. Regardless of what it is, you have influence and impact. You may be in high school in here right now. You have influence and impact. If you've ever said, well, you know what? I really like chocolate ice cream. And all of a sudden, people start going, yeah, you know what? That is good stuff. I really do like chocolate ice cream. And you have people around you that think that's a great idea. Guess what you have just done? You have just led people on an idea. Now, it gets even more intense if all of a sudden you're like, let's go to the store. Yeah! And you have 20 people chasing after you to go down to get ice cream. Okay, that's Spartacus level crazy, all right? That is leadership. If you have influence, if you impact people around you, guess what you are? Leader. Because, in essence, leadership is influence and impact. Now, self-confession this morning that I did not realize I had a gift of leadership until I was probably about 5-6 years into ministry. Mid-20s, I had that thrown at me. But here's the weird thing. It was always there. I just never thought anything about it. Let's go back to the year 1992 and 93. Dan Albin is in high school. Oh, yeah. Ladies, this is me without facial hair, and this is why I have it, because I look tougher. Okay, here's the reason I put these two pictures up. Yes, that is my entire senior class, because it was a small Christian school in West Virginia, all right? And by the way, love the hair, girls in here, the ladies, we need to bring that back. I used to call it the storm cloud, but anyway, my senior year of high school, these two pictures represent two things. The reason I'm in the center of my class picture is because guess what I was voted that year? Class president. I never sought to be class president. They chose me. They said, why don't we make Dan the president? And I was like, sure, whatever. And they made me class president. The second picture, soccer team. First year for our school to have a soccer team, by the way. The coach comes up to me and says, you're going to be captain. Okay. The problem with that is I'd never played soccer before. So this was my first year for a first-year team. We went 3-13. We made the playoffs. We got skunked 13-2 in that playoff game, but it was great. Now, again, two positions that were handed to me back then, and I just was like, okay, whatever, people like me, or they needed somebody, whatever, I'll do it. I didn't think anything about it. But what I didn't realize was these were the beginnings of signs that people saw something in me of influence and impact and leadership in my life, and I was just clueless. And it was, as I said, I had gone several years into ministry later on that I all of a sudden had an elder at my church come to me and say, Dan, you have the gift of leadership. I'm like, what? He said, you have the gift of leadership. I'm like, I'm just doing what I love. That's it. That's all. But then, after he said that, I began to think back through my high school years. And not just these two things here, but even music or video games back when I was in middle and high school that I loved and I would tell everybody about. I never thought about it before. But all of a sudden, I realized whenever I was really into like a new metal band or something like that, and I'm living in, country USA, that's all anyone listened to. All of a sudden, I would have friends like a month later say, hey, I checked out that band that you mentioned. I really like them. I'm a fan now, too. Back then, I was like, okay, that's cool, whatever. But what I did not realize was I was having a level of influence and impact on people, and even the smallest of ways. I wasn't even thinking about it. It was just who I was. It was an instinct. It was just me being me. And from that point forward, I had an understanding that God had given me a gift that was leadership, that I had the ability to influence and impact people for good or for bad. See, that's the hard part about being a leader. You can influence people by all of the mistakes you make in your life, and you're not trying to. It's tough. It's a double-edged sword. It's a great thing, but it's also a dangerous thing. I say all this because I want you to understand that some of you in here have influence and impact, and maybe you haven't even thought much about it. Maybe you understand the story. You weren't really aiming for a position at your job, and all of a sudden they said, hey, we're promoting you. And you're like, what are you doing? I didn't want to be the lead French fry maker at my job. Whatever it is, you were given a promotion, and you weren't even seeking it out, but they saw something in you, and they put you in a higher level of influence. Again, this doesn't even just have to be work or church or whatever. This can be at home. This can be that your family put you in charge of planning a family reunion. They want you to take the ball, or you just do it instinctively because it's just who you are. Whatever the case, this is all a sign of influence and impact that you have, and that is leadership. Now, I want to ask two questions, and this is one where you actually have to raise your hand, okay? How many of you right now would consider yourself a leader? Go ahead. All right. Perfect. Second question. How many of you in here have a position of leadership at a job or whatever it is? How many of you have a position of leadership? You know what's interesting about that? I knew there would probably be a difference in how many I had to answer for the first compared to the second. If you really want to be honest, all of us have a position of influence and so on. As I said, even starting at home, even with our own families, we have that level. So technically, I could say, everyone in here, guess what? You have potentially a position of leadership and influence. But if I ask people, hey, do you have the gift of leadership? You kidding me? No, I don't want that position. But yet I see that same person have influence and impact on people, for good or for bad. Maybe it's I just see them bad-mouthing somebody, Red Sox fans or something like that. They start bad-mouthing them and everybody jumps on the bandwagon with them and they're taking leadership. They have influence and impact in them. And that can't just be thrown aside. That is incredibly important and powerful to understand what you have in you. So I ask you those two questions because I think what it comes down to is many of us define leader sometimes as a role. We sometimes think that a leader is a person who's given a position in an organization or a company or a church or a ministry or whatever it is, that's the leader. The rest of us are not. And that could not be further from the truth. I believe that anytime you are passionate about something and people were persuaded by you, even if you weren't trying, that you were in a position of leadership. Just a simple definition of leadership this morning is this, that leadership is using my influence for a worthwhile cause. Leadership is using the influence that you have in whatever position that God has put you in for a worthwhile cause, for something important. And you get passionate about something, and people who weren't before passionate about what you're passionate about, all of a sudden start to come along and follow you because people are looking for leaders. And basically all of us, every single one of us has influence and impact in some level. Now, there is two different kinds of leadership. I will admit with this. There is a habitual leader and there's a situational leader. Habitual is the ones who just go around, they live their life, and they just influence people, and they don't think much about it in big ways. They influence a lot of people. There's others of you that may be more of a situational leader. If the fire alarm were to go off in here, and right now, bloop, 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 there are some of you that are going to be like, oh, what are we supposed to do? What are we supposed to do? And then there'd be others of you who would immediately get up and start in that situation. Put yourself in, hey, everybody out this way. We need to go out this exit. Did I tell you to do that? No. But in the right situation, sometimes people who normally are sort of passive go into action of being a leader. So I want to say that because I do know some of you may be more passive, but given the right situation, you will spring to action. It doesn't have to do with the role. We don't have people here that are fire drill experts here, okay? It's all about the influence and impact that you have and the gifts that you have. So, how does this tie in with Scripture? I'm glad you asked, because we need to talk about this role and ability thing this morning. And we're going to take a look at an example. I have to fly through 10 years of a person's life in a short amount of time. So, if you have seat belts, please put them on. Stay with me, because we're going to talk about a guy named King Saul, the first king of Israel. I want to set up his story, and we're just going to talk about the first few years of his life. I want you, as we read through this, to think about what was his role and what was his ability. I want you to think about the role and the ability of leadership given to him, because he was going to be the first king of Israel. Now, let me set up the story. Israel has been led not by kings through this part of the Old Testament, but they've been led by judges. Back then, there was prophets, priests, and kings not kings, a judge and a prophet and a priest who would serve the people of God. The judge was kind of a king position, but wasn't a king position. God still wanted to be the one to lead his people. He would speak through those leaders into the people's lives. And the judge at this time was a man named Samuel. Samuel led well. Samuel has a great story. If you read the beginning of 1 Samuel, you get to hear his story. It's an awesome story, a miracle of what God did in his life. But Samuel's getting old. And as Samuel gets old, he says, hey, I'm not going to be around much longer, so I'm going to put my 2 sons in charge. Sounds like a great idea. They've grown up with him. The problem, they're corrupt. They don't lead well. They're taking advantage of the people. They don't respect or honor God the way that their father did. And this is a problem. And the elders, the leaders of Israel, say, you're going to talk to Samuel? I'm not. Hey, let's all go together. We're going to go confront him and tell him this. So we pick up in 1 Samuel chapter 8, verse 5. It says this, the elders come to Samuel, and they said to him, you are old. Well, thanks a lot. And your sons do not follow your ways. Now appoint a king to lead us, such as all the other nations have. Peer pressure or country pressure in this case. Israel's like, you know what? I see those places that we've been fighting against, and they have a king. That's a really cool idea. Why don't we put a human in charge? Rather than God, which is what we're supposed to be doing, let's put a human there. And so they appeal for a king. Samuel's ticked off, not because it was a personal affront to him or his sons, but Samuel's ticked off because they're rejecting God's leadership. And here now they want a human king. But God tells Samuel, no, let them have what they want. But warn them that when they appoint a king over them, there's going to be some consequences. They're going to have to give up some of their own freedom. They're going to have to answer this person. It's not going to be a bed of roses like they think it's going to be. So Samuel goes and starts to seek who God wants to be the king of Israel. And he comes upon a man named Kish. No, I did not stutter there. That's his name, Kish. It was an Old Testament rock band. Kish. Okay, wow, we're really trying with the jokes this morning. So, Kish has a son. His son's name is Saul. Here's what we know about Saul. It gives a story about him chasing some lost goats at the beginning. But all of a sudden it says this about him. It says that he was a foot taller than everybody in Israel and very good looking. He was a looker. Oh, yeah. Now, that's the kind of person I want as my king. Everyone, and you're going to see the reaction to him in a second. Samuel sees him and goes up to Saul, and he does this private ceremony where he pours oil on his head that's symbolic of, you are going to be the first king of Israel. Now, Saul was from an insignificant tribe, a very small tribe amongst the 12 tribes of Israel. Israel was made up by these 12 tribes, and his was the least of them. So that might have been a little shocking. But the day comes for his public coronation. This is supposed to be his moment where I'm like, hey, the king is in town. You know, everybody bow, call me, all this great stuff. The day comes for that public coronation, but something goes wrong. You see, Samuel brings all of Israel before him, and he says, okay, we're going to make this dramatic. We're going to do this thing called casting of lots, which is how God shows us who or what decision we need to make. He brings all 12 tribes in front of him. And he says, okay, God, what tribe is this person from? Now he knows. And it narrows down to the tribe of Benjamin, the small one. So all the rest go off to the side, and they're watching, okay, who in the tribe of Benjamin is going to be our king? And then they narrow it down, and they get down to the house of Kish, and then he says, it's going to be your son, Saul. And that's great. This is that moment. But there's a problem. Now that it's been announced that Saul's going to be king, in chapter 10, verses 21 through 24, it says this, but when they looked for Saul, he was not to be found. That's not a good sign. So they inquired further of the Lord, has the man come here yet? Maybe he's running late. Where is he? And the Lord said, yes, he has hidden himself among the supplies, the baggage. He's hiding. Not a good first impression. Probably not good. It goes on, it says this, they ran and they brought him out, probably drug him out, and he stood among the people. He was a head taller than all of the others. Samuel said to all the people, "Do you see the man the Lord has chosen? There is no one like him among all the peoples." And then the people shouted, "Long live the king! Long live the king! We have it! Woohoo! God let us have a king." And look at him. He's a looker, all right? He's taller than everyone. I mean, he's captain of the football team. This guy is amazing, and he's our king, even though he was just hiding. He's our king. They're excited. A little time passes, and Saul gets an opportunity to lead the army into battle. They have a victory against a group of people called the Philistines. The Philistines, they have a victory. They take out a small portion of the Philistines. The rest of the Philistines say, "We don't like what you just did. We're coming at you with all of our armies that outnumbered Israel." Now all of a sudden, Saul's like, "Oh man, we picked a fight and we are in trouble." Now some basic instructions have been given to Saul. If you're at a point where you need God's direction, if you're at a point where you need God's blessing, which this was one of them, you need to go to a place called Gilgal, a town, and wait for Samuel for 7 days. And then he will show up. He will do a sacrifice to the Lord and ask the Lord for direction or favor going into battle against the Philistines. This was very important. This was the role of a priest to fill. Saul was not to do that. So, Saul, as people are terrified the Philistines are going to kill them all and take them out, they go to Gilgal like they're supposed to do. And they wait 7 days, and it picks this up in the next passage of Scripture says this: he waited 7 days. That's what he was supposed to do. The time set by Samuel. But Samuel did not come to Gilgal. And Saul's men began to scatter. They're like, "He's not going to show up. We're doomed. The Philistines are going to take us over. We're done." They start to scatter. So Saul asserts leadership. It says, "Bring me the burnt offerings and the fellowship offerings." And Saul offered up the burnt offering. Well, that's leadership, isn't it? Verse 10, just as he finished making the offering, Samuel arrived, and Saul went out to greet him. What does that mean? He was impatient. He chose to step into a role that was not his. And this was an affront to God. This was an affront to God. He did something he wasn't supposed to do because, honestly, he even admits a little bit later that he saw the people scattering and he knew the people really wanted an answer, and so he caved to the pressure of the people he was leading. In other words, he saw his poll numbers and they were dropping by the minute. And so he stepped in and did something he was not supposed to do, and Samuel rebukes him. Samuel says, "Because of what you have done," actually he says it in chapter 13 to 14, "You have done a foolish thing," Samuel said. "You have not kept the command the Lord your God gave you. If you had, he would have established your kingdom over Israel for a long time. You would have been the one that everyone's like the greatest king of all time. You were our George Washington. That's how great you would have been. But you didn't. You couldn't obey God. But now your kingdom will not endure. The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart," and we know that this would be David, "and appointed him ruler of his people, because you have not kept the Lord's command." Saul couldn't follow basic instructions as the king. Saul feared people's opinion of him. Saul was insecure. Saul was immature. Not good marks of a leader that's going to be your king. Second battle is given to Saul. And this is where we're going to end this part of his life. Saul is given another opportunity to go to war against another group of people called the Amalekites. Saul is given specific instructions from God. You need to go and wipe them out. Everything. Do not leave a stone unturned. You're going to wipe them all out. They have been an affront to our people. They've been a threat to our people. They've been an affront to me. They do not like me. They've been anti-me all of this time. Go eliminate them. Saul's like, okay, instructions received. They go to battle against the Amalekites. And then something happens. Paul decides, wow, man, there's some really good stuff here. You know what? Let's keep the best of the animals. And oh yeah, just maybe as a little trophy for us, we're going to keep the king alive. And we're going to take it back. But wipe everything else out. Go ahead. Do it. So they don't fully fulfill what God told them to do. And so after the battle, they take the best of the animals and so on, and they take the king, and they start bringing it back to Israel. And once again, Samuel is supposed to meet with Saul. And it says this, that early in the morning, Samuel got up and went to meet Saul. But he was told, Saul has gone to Carmel. There he has set up a monument in his own honor. That is not a good thing. He's already making his own trophy. Hey, look how great I am. And has turned and gone on down to Gilgal. When Samuel reached him at Gilgal, that was their meeting spot, Saul said, the Lord bless you. I've carried out the Lord's instructions. Liar. Not so. Samuel said, oh, really? What then is this bleating of sheep I hear? What is the lowing of cattle I hear? Saul answered, the soldiers brought them from the Amalekites. They spared the best of the sheep and cattle to sacrifice to the Lord your God. We were going to do something good with them. We were going to sacrifice them to God. We thought he might like that. But we totally destroyed the rest. I could see him saying it, that way. What did he do? He did not follow God's commands perfectly. He blames his soldiers. He's building a trophy, a monument to himself. Look at how great I am. Saul, let me put it this way. Saul had the role of king of Israel. He had been given that seat, that position of authority. But just because he was in it didn't mean he fit that role. Did not mean he was qualified for that role. You see insecurity in him. You see pride. You see a lack of ability of following God. He was not cut out. And yet God still chose him for a reason. My big idea this morning is this. A role won't change your reality. A role won't change your reality. Here's what I mean. A role isn't going to change who you are. It may. Hopefully in a good way and for a good reason. But a role is not going to change your reality of who you are. Saul, you'd think that he's given this position of king, and many of us might think, well, he's king now. Everything's great. He's up there singing, I just can't wait to be king, out of the Lion King and all this. And then he gets it, and he's just going to fill that role. He's going to magically change once that role has been given him, and he's going to be great. He's going to be fantastic. And that didn't happen. That didn't happen. Instead, what it did do is it amplified who he really was. There's something about when you're given a position of leadership that all of a sudden, all the warts, all the weaknesses, all of a sudden are amplified for everybody to see. Even in the role of a pastor. It's a lot easier when I'm not a pastor to be a pastor, because I realize when I come into a position of leadership here in a church, my weaknesses, my flaws, my mistakes are going to be amplified. Leadership reveals who you are. A role reveals who you are. Saul was guilty of all these things: partially obeying God, pride, fearing public opinion, impatience, low respect for God, all of these things, and insecurity. You see the insecurity go on and on. All of these were already in his heart before he ever took the throne. All of these things were wrestles that he had before he ever was king. And once he became king, they became more evident. The cracks showed. Maybe the position made them a little bit bigger than what they were before. He was insecure before. Now he's really insecure. His problems were revealed by his role. Eventually, even David came on the scene. David came on the scene and became king, or was anointed king. He wasn't formally king yet. And Saul spends the rest of his days hunting David to kill him out of jealousy and rage and anger and insecurity. The role revealed who Saul really was. I want to say this morning. If you give a person a role, you're going to see who they really are. If you are given a role, I would be curious this morning what it would reveal about you. If you were given a high-level position, wherever it may be, community, church, work, whatever, what would be revealed out of you? What would come out of who you are right now before you have that position. Roles can reveal things, but they can't change your reality. I have a few practical challenges and takeaways from this, or one challenge, but two takeaways. Number one, my question for you this morning is, are you living up to the role that you are in or the role that you're seeking? Are you living up to the role that you are in or the role that you hope to have in the future? Are you fulfilling what is required of that position now? Because I can tell you right now is the time to be working on what is required of you. And not to expect to just waltz into it and it's magically going to change you. Oh, it'll change you, but it may not be for the better because it's going to reveal your weaknesses. Some roles that some of us want to be a parent. You need to be preparing yourself to be a parent even before you may have even met the person that you're going to marry or be with. I don't know. You need to work on that now and the character traits of what that requires now so that walking into that role, you're better prepared than just like, you know what? I'm just going to take this whole parenthood thing by the hip, whatever. We're going to figure it out as we go in. Prepare yourself now. Maybe it's not a parent. Maybe it's a spouse. Prepare yourself to be a spouse. Prepare yourself. Work on those character things that you need to work on. Maybe it's to be higher up in your workplace. What are you doing now to prepare for that role? How are you preparing yourself? What characteristics do you need? What do you need to work on in your life? Whatever it is, now's the time. Are you living up to the role you're in or the role that you're seeking? Each of these different things require a high level of preparation. But the reality for us a lot of times is this, that we often want the title, not the responsibilities. We often want the title, not the responsibilities. And that's the tough part. We'd like to be a lead person. We'd like to be somebody that people look to. But when we get in there, we're like, oh man, this wasn't the way I thought it was going to be. Can I get out of this real quick? We like the title. We don't like the responsibilities. Sometimes we slack off on our own responsibilities when we do fill a role and we don't live up to it. And that's a problem too, because that means there's stuff for us to work on in our life. There's things we need to chisel away. There's habits that we need to work on. Obviously, you know what? Hey, I'm not a perfect leader. There's still stuff I'm learning. It's a non-ending pursuit of learning. I will always be learning. I remember just one story, and I'll give you the second one, but I remember when I was early in youth ministry that I had this young guy who just graduated from high school, and he came and he's like, I want to be a youth leader. I was like, okay, sure, we'll put you in. Put him in, and then he had the nerve, and he wasn't trying to say he wanted to get me fired, but he looked at me, he's like, I want your role one day. I want your role one day. I was like, okay, cool. Let me try and prepare you for this. Here was the thing. He never showed up to meetings on time because we had youth group on Sundays, and he was watching the Eagles play. Now, normally I would say that should get him a promotion, but in this case, it was not helping the youth ministry. He was crossing some boundaries with his contact and communications with students. I know he was close to their age. He was doing things that were not things he would be able to do if he was in that role, and I tried to help him, and he just sort of was like, whatever. And I remember venting to one of my elders. He's like, you know what? He says he wants that position, but here's the reality. A check isn't going to change anything in his life. And what he meant was this. Giving him the role is not going to change him. Who he is now is who he will be if we were to give him that role today. And so you just keep hammering on him of what he needs to become. Now, I will say this. Guess what? Years later, he took the role that I filled. He actually got it, and he's doing a great job to this day. He's a youth pastor there, and it's awesome. But I remember there was some things that had to be built in his life over a couple years that were hard for him in order for him to be prepared for that role. So, are you living up to the role that's given to you? Maybe you need to ask people that are in the role that you want to learn from them and what you need to prepare yourself for. Secondly, what role have you been hiding from? What role have you been hiding from? Here Saul is about to be given the role, and he's hiding. It would be easier for him to just say, can I just get out of this? What role have you been hiding from? Some of us have gifts and abilities, But we don't want the commitment or responsibility, and this happens in church too. It's just easier to show up, hang out, leave, than to take a lead role or to step up or prepare or become a potential leader. This is in our communities that people just, whatever, you let them fight it all out, I'm going to be over here. Rather than use the gift of influence and impact that you have, we want to just be left alone. What have you been hiding from? Maybe you're afraid of just the commitment. Maybe it's the responsibility. Maybe you're afraid of the microscope of scrutiny that you're going to go under if you take that role. Whatever the case, we have a shortage of leaders. We have a shortage of leaders all through the world, and we need you to step up to the abilities that God has given you and say, I'll lead. We need you to be the one to go into the battlefield. We need you to be the one to lead people and to influence people for something noble. We need you to do this. The reality is that things suffer as a result of people not stepping up. And we'll talk about that in a few weeks. Things suffer if we don't step up. And so, I leave you with this challenge this morning. As we've talked about this role thing, the ability thing, your reality thing, who you are now, if you were put in a position, what would that reveal in your life? The role that you've been hiding from is what? This morning, what is the role that I have been hiding from? I leave that blank because I want you to think about that this week. I want you to think about it. Is there a role? This may be, I'm just going to go there. This might be that you need to step up in being a parent. You have kids, but that doesn't necessarily mean you've been a parent. You may be a spouse, but that doesn't mean that you've been caring for the other person that is your spouse. Whatever the case, what is the role you've been hiding from? And let's step into it. Let's prepare ourselves. Let's change to step into it because the world needs leaders, needs good examples, needs people that they can follow. And people that love Jesus, man, that's only a bonus. That's a big bonus there. We want to be people that love Jesus that people can follow. Let's pray. Father, as we talk about leadership over the next few weeks, we ask that you would open our minds, challenge us, Lord, those that are here that maybe have the ability but just don't feel like making the commitment, that they would step up to that role, whether it's here at Hope, whether it's at their workplace, whether it's amongst their friends and their peers, their family, whatever that role is, Lord, that they've been hiding from, that God, you just keep bringing it back up to their mind. And Lord, that they would use the abilities of influence and impact that you have given them, and that they would hear from you and step up into it in boldness and confidence. Lord, maybe there's somebody here that is in a role that they are just not qualified for, and they need to take the step back to work on themselves. That, Lord, today would be a day that you might challenge them to do that, to work on themselves so that maybe one day they get to re-fulfill that role. Whatever the case, Lord, do a work in us, in the circles of influence that you have given us, that we would be who you want us to be in that role. And we ask this in your name. Amen.